OUB at Ohio University. Started professionally in radio in Dubuque, and then started in television in Davenport, Iowa. Now, I could go on and read more of the bio that Channel 9 has on there, but personally, since I had the pleasure of working with this guy, I can tell you a few things. When it comes to sports, he is knowledgeable. He's witty, he's patient, very patient. As a human being, he is a personality with personality. This is a treat for you guys. Please welcome Sports Director for Channel 9, John Popovich.
Very kind. This was an earlier time we had a chance to work together, and it's very interesting as you go through this life and go through this business. You never know who you're going to run into again, so be careful. I remember one time we were sitting in a newsroom, and myself and Dennis Jansen, who worked with me for 29 years, and we were introduced to our new news director. And he goes, "Oh, hell." He says, "That guy used to be an intern of mine at Channel 12. He says, "I hope I didn't abuse him too much." Here's an intern became his boss, so you never know what you're going to run into. Congratulations on what you guys are doing. I know a lot of the people that have already come out of this school, and they've done really well. And some of them I have great respect for. I work every day. So don't think sometimes that people aren't hiring you, people aren't listening, people aren't appreciating for what you do. You know, keep up the good work and just keep doing it. I was thinking as I was driving over here, though, today, of somebody that came and spoke to one of my classes back when I was in college. And I went to Ohio University, and this would have been like 1970, 71. And I had a professor by the name of Bob Coe. And Bob was a pretty high-powered guy who had been president of the Dumont television network, which later became, it was one of the first networks, it later became absorbed by ABC or NBC. Anyway, he would borrow on some of his people at ABC and invite them in to talk to our classes. And this guy showed up one day, and I forget what his name was, but I remember he walked in with this beautiful blue pinstripe suit, which I knew cost more than my entire tuition for that year. And I thought, oh boy, this guy's going to be something. And I don't remember much of what he said that day, but I do remember this. He said, "I hope you guys all know how to sell shoes." He says, because this industry is flat. This industry has reached its peak. He says, you better know how to sell shoes because there aren't any jobs out there. This was about 1970, 71. So this is a guy that's at ABC, I think he was in marketing or sales. He didn't know anything more than, frankly, what I know today about our business. Because who knows exactly where this business is going. There was another guy I met, and I think I was a junior. He was a graduate assistant, and people referred to him as a blue skyer. And I says, "What's a blue skyer?" I had no idea what they were talking about. They said, "He's a guy that believes that one of these days, you're not going to get television the way you're getting it now. You're going to get, they're going to connect by cable, and you're going to pay for television." I said, "Hell, we're not going to be paying for television. Cable television? Never knew anything like that." Again, this is about 1970. At that time, you were getting your television by antenna. ABC, CBS, NBC. Who knew? This guy is probably filthy rich now, sitting on a beach, probably owns an island, and I'm still working. So this just goes to show, regardless of whether it was 46 years ago, 45 years ago, or it's today, none of us really know what this business is going to do, what it's going to turn into. And who expected the internet? When I started, there was film. When videotape came along, I thought it was the greatest thing the world had ever invented. We didn't have to process film anymore. Videotape has disappeared. We don't use tape anymore. Of course, everything is, digital, and we put things on hard drives. I thought a satellite truck was one of the greatest things we could. We could go anywhere and be live. We don't use satellite trucks anymore. We use it's a backpack. It's called a TVU now that guys put on their back, and all of a sudden we're able to be live doing the news. It's incredible, and the biggest thing that I could stress as I get started here today is keep learning and keep adapting. Because believe me, I wouldn't be at Channel 9 for 37 years if I would have just stayed doing what I was doing. You have to keep changing. Everything changes. And all you have to do is have the patience and the ability to learn. Now, the fact is you guys are learning, and you're going to be a lot quicker at all of this stuff than I could possibly be anymore. And so what you're getting off, but you gotta realize, this is just the start. This is just where you get started. Just to give you a little bit of what I did, and TC kind of outlined the chances I had. And my biggest break was that I was part of a high school radio station, and I got bit with this bug. You know, I want to play sports, and all these other kids kept growing after 8th grade, 9th grade. They kept, like, they're faster, bigger, taller, and I was like I am now, only about 50 pounds lighter. And so I was looking for something else to do, and I got to do this. And you know, we'd play polkas all day, and then we'd do the news, and we'd do sports, we'd go out and do the broadcast. And so I got to do it, then I decided to go to Ohio University and do this. And I was doing exactly what you're doing now, sitting in class, trying to learn things. Those days, we're dealing with reel-to-reel tapes, trying to cut that with we're making our edits with a razor blade. It was as primitive as you could possibly believe. Electronic editing and that stuff, no, it didn't exist yet. Film was the same way. You learned how to scrape off the emulsion from a piece of film, put it together, and try to make it into television. I wanted to be a newsman, and I wanted to be either a newsman or a disc jockey. And newsman seemed to be my way because I really enjoyed the news. And I went to Dubuque, a little radio station there, but a great place. It's great to get out of your comfort level and go somewhere, do something where nobody knows who you are and what you can do, and then you do it on your own. Then they hired me in Davenport, a little bigger. They call the Quad Cities. It's over on the Mississippi. And they had a TV station. And I discovered I liked news, but I didn't have the gut for it. One day on the Mississippi, they fished out a family of 4 that had drowned. The boat had capsized, and they wanted me to go knock on a door and talk to the family. I said, no, I'm not going to do that sort of thing. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. Some people have the temperament to do that sort of thing. I didn't. And right about that time, somebody quit in sports, and I was able to get their job. I got lucky. Anyway, the worst thing that happens in sports is the Bengals losing the playoffs, or the Reds don't even get close to the playoffs, or whatever. You know, it's a locker room, and it's not life and death.
No,
And
it's close.
it's yeah.
I mean, it is
To
close.
some people it is.
It's pretty normal.
But you know, I found what I like to do, and what I like to do also was tell stories about people, and tell stories about sports, and that's where I made my living, really. We don't do it as much now because they asked me to be the anchor about 3-4 years ago, and so that's what I do, and your stories are much shorter. But for many years, what I was able to do is take and do stories, and I did it for 3 years with CBS. We were there, a reporter that would go to the various big events. We went to the Olympics, Winter Olympics, Atlanta Olympics, went to Super Bowls and that sort of thing. Then we quit being CBS and we became an ABC station, and that ended. But it was a really good experience. But it was because I could write a story. It all began with being able to write and be able to kind of produce things. Exactly what you're doing now, I imagine. You're probably, whether you're a disc jockey, whether you're doing anything, you're probably telling stories. You're learning how to communicate to other people. And that's exactly what I was forced to do. And somebody told me one day, they go, that's what you're good at. You're not good at this. Because first I wanted to be an anchor. And they says, you know, you probably don't have the personality for that. But you're good at telling stories. And I listened to him, and it was very smart for me to do that. So that's where it's gotten me here. And I've been doing this 50 years now. I started when I was 15 years old. So I'm 65 now. And I'll probably do it for a couple more years. The one thing you have to understand, it's a very unpredictable business. And that makes it hard, but it makes it fun. Because every day is different. And it's not like, my dad was a dry cleaner. And he had a great dry cleaners, but every day was the same. I was gonna do the pants and the shirts and deliver and stuff like that. I didn't want to do that. And he says, what did you learn from that? I said, I learned I didn't want to be a dry cleaner. And that was the main thing. And he didn't mind that at all. But the great part about this business is that it keeps challenging you too, because it's going to keep changing on you, drive you crazy. And the business is tough right now. I think it is anyway. But look at these phones. Everybody has an appetite for information. I don't know whether you look at emails, you're looking at information, but there is still a great appetite for information. The big question out there now is, where are you guys gonna get your information? Are you gonna get it from a newsroom? Are you gonna get it from a television? Are you gonna get it from mobile? Are you gonna get it from the radio? I'm not sure. I have a son who's 29, and I still don't know where he gets his news. He writes for a little paper down in South Carolina. And yeah, unfortunately, he had the same problem I did. He liked to write, and he liked to write stories. And I tried to steer him another direction, but he stayed in that direction. And now he's trying to figure out, okay, how can I make this work? Just like you guys are trying to make it work. But I have met some really good people that have come out of this school. Chris Gastright is one of the really, really great directors at our place. And he's, for one thing, is he's creative. He's always thinking about something that's different. And I didn't even know this till I talked to TC about the different people I've met along the way that have come out of here. So you're in good hands. It's just a matter of you have to just keep doing what you need to do. I didn't prepare a great deal to say today because I figured you'd probably have questions, and I hope you do. Because I can't give you, I figure, I can't tell you, you're probably more interested in what's going on with what you need to know about this business. All I can tell you is give you some of my experience of how things have gone over the years and what I've learned about this business. So that's my prepared remarks. I'd like you to ask me some questions about what you need to know, what you think's important about this business right now. Yeah.
Did this business make your dreams come true?
It did, for the most part, because what it did is it put me in situations that I never thought I'd get to go to. Like I said, I've been to probably 10 Super Bowls. I've been to, 5 or 6 Final Fours and that. But the biggest thing is, what's really nice about this business, and I've thought about this for years, is you put your signature on your work. You know something? If I go home at night, and I used to, we do what we just call packages, I'd put together a story of 2 minutes, and I'd get to go home and watch that. Now, if it was crappy, it really is, and I've done some work that I wasn't real proud of, and I made sure the next time I didn't do that again. Because you're sitting at home maybe with your wife, your girlfriend, or whatever, and you're realizing, oh, she didn't stir. When she saw that, she'll say, oh, that was nice. And you realize it didn't hit the target at all. But like I said, I worked for my dad, the dry cleaners, and you could go home and you could put a widget on something, and that's all very nice. But when you do something in broadcasting, it's recorded, it's out there, it's on the internet now, it's on maybe YouTube or Facebook or whatever. It's your work, and people could see it, and it's your signature is on that. And to me, that's where your dreams come true, is that people could actually appreciate what you've done. So, to me, that was important. I don't know how important it is to everybody else, but boy, I tell you what, that when my brothers and sisters, I have 5 brothers and sisters, when they would say, I saw something you did, none of them live here. They live, one's out in Seattle and Washington, D.C. and whatever. When they see your work and they go, hey, I saw something you did. Wow, that's very meaningful. Anybody else?
What's your most memorable moment so far? Whether it's
Well, one of my first memorable moments, and I was reminded of this just recently, is I was working here only 2 weeks, and I got a phone call in the newsroom, and probably because it just came to sports, and they said, somebody said, hey, you interested? Muhammad Ali's getting his haircut at Stag's Barbershop. And I says, what? And you want to come over and talk to him? No, they didn't say that. And I says, really? I says, so I'm thinking, okay, this has to be like 1979. And so I says, well, if the champ's really there, put him on the phone. All of a sudden, I'm talking to Muhammad Ali, put him on. So we ran with the camera up there, and somebody a few years later brought me pictures that they'd take it just so I could prove to everybody. And when he died recently, I was able to pull those out and show he was wearing this big, like, apron and talk to him. But that was good. I was at we had a great fighter in Cincinnati named Aaron Pryor, and I was at ringside at a couple of his events in Miami and Las Vegas when he fought for titles against Alexis Arguello. You know, but sometimes the most meaningful stuff is what you get to do with the people. You get to travel a lot with people that you really get used to and become friends with: photographers, producers, satellite truck operators. And if you put together, I did a show for 33 years called Sports of All Sorts. And it was a live show, it was a call-in show, and we'd do it from Pittsburgh or Cleveland or something after a Bengals game. And to me, if you could pull that off, and nobody fell flat on their face, you stayed on the air, nobody swore on the air, and it turned out to be pretty good television, and it got pretty good ratings the next day. To me, that's what you try to do. You know, you guys, I'm sure you work on different projects, and when you finish a project, you'll know after a while whether it's good or bad. And then you'll look at that project in about 2 years, play it back and go, I thought that was good. You know, you get better at this stuff. The repetition, it's just like sports. They always talk about a quarterback needs the repetitions. Same thing in our business. You just have to keep doing it over and over and over again, and you get better at it. And you find it becomes so much easier to do things after a while. What else? Yeah.
So you said you didn't want to be a dry cleaner, but you knew you wanted to be either a disc jockey or you wanted to go to television.
Yeah.
Out of everything that is a career, why those two things?
Well, first of all, it was the only thing I knew I could do. When I did it in high school, I realized I was able to do that. I didn't, you know, I knew, I don't know if you ran into these kind of people in high school. They had their whole world mapped out.
Yeah.
They knew they were going to this college, they were going to go into this thing, and I had no idea.
Dakota was filled with them.
And when you go back and they go to a 10-year or 20-year reunion, you find out this. They didn't do any of that stuff. They got side railed somewhere. Maybe, you know, they had a kid. Maybe they found something else they liked. Maybe they flunked out of school. I had a couple of guys that had that whole thing. They ended up going to Vietnam. And, you know, that made it tough on them. But that's what I thought I could do more than anything else. And I think that's kind of how we all do it. We kind of tend to aim toward places that we feel like we have some talents. And I was doing play-by-play in high school. We were very lucky that we would go, and I had a really good high school team, Struthers High School in those days, and we would go and do basketball and foot, and then you get feedback. Somebody says, hey, I heard you on the radio the other day. I heard you doing a game, and boy, I'll tell you what, talk about feeding the ego. And you guys will find that out. If somebody hears you on the radio, you're doing something on Cincy Underground or whatever, they're gonna hear you, and they're gonna remark. And believe me, the public's gonna give you feedback, and probably now more so than ever with social media. Back then, you had to run into somebody, and now you're gonna get it almost instantaneous. But that means a lot to you. That if somebody says something, both good or bad, it means a lot, because you'll find out that, well, maybe I said something I shouldn't have said, or I can do something. But that's really why I just thought somebody suggested I'd be a pharmacist, and I thought, well, I could probably make a lot more money doing that, but I just didn't feel like I wanted to be that. So. Anybody else? Yeah.
So could you give us a time where you wanted to give up, or where things got really tough, but you just persevered?
I never wanted to get out of the business, but there were times I wanted to go somewhere else. And that's what I'm dealing with my son now, because he says, I think I've done everything I can. And I says, I'd be unhappy if you were too comfortable. I want you to get to that level that you're uncomfortable, and it's gonna happen at every job. You either then have to take that job and elevate yourself and do something more, or you have to go somewhere else and get a job, because the one last thing you wanna do is stay in a job and make yourself miserable and make everyone else around you miserable. I've had a lot of people work with over the years, and I'll take a person with a good attitude over a person with good talent any day of the week. Because if they come and they're willing to work and they're really happy against, versus somebody else who's just kind of spreading bad will, it's gold to have somebody. And that's what I like about the people that I've seen come out of here. They're positive, they're happy, they want to do some work, and that's great, because believe me, there's a lot of people in our business too, that because things have changed so much, they just got pissed off. And they wanted to get out, and a lot of them did. And I don't know what they're doing in some cases. They've either moved to another station, or they've just completely gone out of business. We've put more people in public relations than any other place. Our newsroom, I'm telling you, I bet you there are a dozen people doing PR around Cincinnati that used to be in our newsroom, because there were new demands put on their time. Used to be, if you were like a news person, if you were a reporter, you just went out and reported. Now you're being asked, you're being asked to write stories for the website. You're being asked to, do Twitter and do Facebook and maybe Instagram, stuff like that. And you're being asked to go out and often take your phone and shoot the video, do things. This really riled up some people. They didn't want to do that anymore. So again, it's a part of having to adapt, having to learn new technology, and who knows what's next? I don't know what's next. Who saw this whole internet thing, huh? I certainly didn't. It's the craziest thing, and it's the greatest thing. It's hard to believe life without it now. When you're without your phone, now you're like, oh, geez, what am I doing? How do I connect to anybody else? Yeah, you really do. And it's nice sometimes to be without it, but at other times you think, wow, that's my lifeline. Anybody else? Yeah.
In a business that changes as rapidly as this one does, you managed to stay in one space for 37 years, which TC said is just incredible to imagine that you've been here this long. But with all the success you've had in this area, why didn't you look to pursue maybe a larger opportunity in a bigger market, or take one of those jobs that could have been offered to you somewhere else?
I did it a couple times. But most I was approached by Channel 12 and Channel 5 each time, and I decided to stay where I was. That might have been, but about the time I was having a chance to do something, my wife and I were going through a thing where we were adopting a son, and this was in '86, and so we had to stay here, not only when the adoption took place, but a couple years afterwards, in order to establish residence and stuff like that. And it turned out to be a great time, because it allowed me to stick around here, and also sometimes you just have to get over a hump. I am about to get my 11th news director. I've had 11 general managers, and all of them come, and most of the news directors think they invented news. Let's do this. There's one guy, he sets up he does a seating chart, just like you were in 3rd grade. He did a seating chart where we're supposed to sit, and they all come with this stuff, and your stomach grinds, and you just get ticked off, and then you realize you just got to keep doing what you're doing, because he's probably going to be gone in a year or two, and then maybe you get somebody that's better, and usually it is, or you get used to that person. I just had a lady that was a news director, and she just got fired. We haven't had a news director for about 5 months, but her and I banged heads for about 6 months. But I found out all she wanted was, she didn't want to be surprised. They all want something. And she didn't want to be, she wanted to really be in on everything you did. So after a while I learned that. I guess you have to stomach something, and it's a long time to go. But I've learned that I think you have to roll with the punches more than anything else. And eventually, if you keep doing what you believe is right, I always felt that I must be doing something right to last that long, because they've fired a lot of other people. And My good looks aren't getting me here. My athletic talents aren't getting me here. It's so I must be doing something else right to work with people. The other thing is you better be able to work with people. And, you know, I'm sure you guys are in classrooms. There's somebody there that you really don't care for too much. You know, it happens in school, it happens at work, but at some point, you better figure out how to do this and get along. And you often find out those people are pretty good to work with. You know, they might be different than you, and they might be have different, but they bring something to the table. You bring something to the table. Yep.
So, like, how does it feel to be an icon? Because you are, like, iconic.
No.
In our city, you are pretty much.
Yeah, you are.
You know, that's part of why I stuck around. It's easier to be. There's a comfort level here that if you went somewhere else, you're starting all over again. Nobody knows who you are,
No one knows your work.
and then you're just like, by that time, then probably when I had a chances, I was probably getting too old to want to do it, and I was raising a family and doing that sort of thing. But I like Cincinnati too. I think this is a really good town. I'm not from here. I'm from northeastern Ohio, but I like the people. It was a good place to raise a son. I don't know. To me, there's an ease about Cincinnati that's not. It doesn't take a lot of work to get at it. But, yeah.
Have you thought about what you're going to be doing after retirement?
I haven't.
Or have you thought about?
You know something, what I'd like to do is we have at Channel 9, the people that came before me compiled the best history of Cincinnati there is in this town as far as film, video, and I would actually like to just go back and do things, historical pieces, little pieces for the web. This happened on this date in 1975. This happened in sports on this date, and I know how to access most of that stuff. And I kind of get a kick. I like history, and Cincinnati likes its history too. It's very proud of what's happened here over the years, not just in news, but sports and things like that. So I've always felt that that's something I wouldn't mind just doing on a part-time basis. I had dinner the other day with a guy, his name is Al White. He's the one that's was part of, there were about a 3-man team that started the newsroom at Channel 9 back in, I think he said 57. Al's 92 now. And after he retired about 3 times, they kept him, well, you asked a really good question, because he didn't want to just stay at home and cut the grass once a week and do that stuff. But the news director gave him a job of taking our old film files and updating them and making them accessible to people who have to look up a story. They're doing away with the, like the Cincinnati Gardens is gonna get torn down. Well, it's because of the video that he's put together from early days at the Gardens of Oscar Robertson playing there, the Beatles playing there, or different things that happened there, that we're able to take and do a story and say, hey, this is why the Cincinnati Gardens was important to us. So he actually brought this up to me. He says, you know, you could do something like that maybe on a part-time basis. And now, if you combine that video with stuff on the website and write stories, then all of a sudden, maybe it's something that's very productive and something that I'd find to be a pretty nice challenge. Because, like I said, I'm 65. I feel good, and I don't really want to. You know, everybody keeps asking, how long are you going to do this? How long are you going to do this? I was like, man, why do you keep asking? I just wish I could do it till they tell me the one thing you'll find about this business, though, it's not always your choice. It's somebody else's choice when they want you to quit. And so we'll see, but they haven't asked yet, so we'll find out. Anybody else? Yeah.
You've been in town for a lot of the major sports events that have happened, at least in our lifetime. So you saw, you were here for Pete's 41-92.
Yeah.
You were here for the Bengals 2 Super Bowls and the Reds wire to wire. Do you have a favorite sporting moment that you can think of that happened?
The most memorable is the Freezer Bowl, is when the Bengals played in the AFC Championship. That was in '81, and it was 59 below with the wind chill. And it was, I mean, we were, at those days, these were still early days of videotape, so what
Almost
you did
an
is,
ice ball.
these guys had a video camera here, and then there was an umbilical cord that came down, and then they had a recorder here, and that's where the tape ran. Those things kept freezing. So they had a shuttle that kept taking these recorders back to the station, and they would have hair dryers to warm them up and just warm them. Then they would take them back down. Hopefully they lasted for a while. No, that's how it worked. And now everything, of course, is housed in the camera. But a story that goes with that is the night before, I had done a Xavier basketball game in Evansville. And it was just as frozen in Evansville. This whole Midwest was frozen at that time. And I got up the next morning, and El Shuttlecotty was the boss. This guy was big in Cincinnati. The news was named after him. It was the El Shuttlecotty News. That's what they called the 11 o'clock news. And that. Anyway, he calls me in the morning. He says, "Hey, call people around that are coming in today and tell them all to wear a white shirt and a black tie." And I said, "Okay." In those days, you didn't question him. You just did what you were told. And so I did that. I called like 3 or 4 people that were going to be reporters and that. And that night, as I saw what he had, he had a whole rack of blazers, orange blazers that he had got from Ben's department store downtown. Apparently Ben had called him and said, "Hey, you know, I have this, everybody wants to be a Bengal station." And he said, "Here's how you do it is you know, we have all these orange, they're much oranger than this guy's shorts here. It was more like this, the shirt there, the FC Cincinnati colors." So we all had these jackets to wear. And so when we went on that night, I was wearing a jacket, the orange jacket, the weather guy was, we had people at the precinct and a couple other places where we were doing live reports, they were all wearing the yellow jackets. And so the news would come on, and and he was very happy because he thought he had pulled off a big deal. And I went over and I flipped on, see what everybody else was doing. I checked to Channel 12, and they were all wearing orange jackets. Channel 5, they were all wearing orange jackets. Whoever this guy at Ben's department store was, he pulled off a coup. He must have gotten rid of about 30 jackets in one. And he sold them to all these gullible news directors. And so that's one of my freezer war stories. But I got to do the Olympics in Lillehammer. Were probably the next thing. I was there for like 5 weeks. And this was the Nancy Kerrigan, Tanya Harding, and that whole soap opera that played out. And so that was in '94. But you know, the whole Pete thing was interesting and very sad. But we followed Pete in St. Louis and Chicago leading up to 41-92. And I had come back because there was a Bengals game on the Sunday, thinking he wasn't going to play in Chicago and try to break the record in Chicago. And there Pete does, he decides to start. And he's playing in Chicago, and we're with Marge Schott, the owner of the Reds, and she's going nuts. She's saying, "What's he doing there? If he breaks it here, then nobody wants to come to the games in Cincinnati." And luckily he came up 1 short, and not by much. But there have been a lot of great moments in this town, and both Bengals Super Bowls were great and almost just
Devastating.
although I got to tell you, the first Super Bowl I didn't go to in Pontiac, again, my boss called and he says, "Here's the deal. The sales department has sold a Bengals special every night." This was in 1981. He says, "You're the guy that has to do these." And every night at 11:30, he says, "So here's what we'll do." He says, "If you want to go to Pontiac for the Super Bowl, you can. If not, how about we send you to Tampa for spring training?" So here it is, Pontiac, Tampa. 40 degrees below zero there. I said, "I'll take Tampa." Everybody else here? The side's been kind of quiet, yeah.
For those of us who want to be like on-air talent, I know you have to start somewhere, and you have to, usually they say you want to start in a smaller market before you just jump into a bigger market. Do you have any advice on how to do that, or if you should still, try and get into that bigger market, get any kind of internships, or?
You get to the bigger market quicker these days, I'll tell you that. But I still believe to make mistakes, because you're gonna make mistakes, and to kind of refine your look and everything, the smaller market helps. I still go up and visit family up in Youngstown, or you go to Dayton, or go to Lima, or something like that. Those are places that are great to go to and spend a year or two really learning how, and you see people being shuffled in and out. So they're hiring before somebody hires them in Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Columbus or Cincinnati. I think it's critical. I see people that we hire too quickly here, and they're not ready. So they go through a lot of, I think, some rough. They have a rough time of it because they haven't learned how to. They're not comfortable with the technology, or maybe they're comfortable with the technology, but they haven't done a lot of reporting. And sometimes you just have to do, you know, if you want to be on the air, you better be. You have to be confident, and the confidence comes from having done it somewhere else. I still think it's good. I would still see the route I took from, I know people go, Dubuque, oh God, Davenport, and it was the 73rd market, but man, it was, the training was as good as can be. When I showed up here, I felt I knew what I could do stuff. Now you guys have the, well, everybody has a camera now, so I guess it's not hard to be able to do a resume, and probably not a tape. You just probably do a clip or something like that and send it to somebody. Yeah, they're gonna let you know, and especially try to find a news director or somebody. If you want to be on the air, find somebody that you say, listen, I really want to do this. I want to be in this business. I might not be ready for your newsroom right now, but I'd really prefer if you could look at this tape and just tell me what I have to do in order to work for your station. And let them know that this is really important to you, but more than anything else, you want feedback. That you want them to say, listen, I got to figure out how to get from point A to point B. Can you help me do that in some way? And I think most of them would be happy. They'll probably get on the phone and talk to you. And because I think, like I said, every news director thinks that they're God's greatest gift to news. And some of them are really good, and some of them have been to many markets, and usually when they get fired enough time, they become consultants. And then they tell news directors what to do, and it's like, oh, how does this happen? You know, but there's a lot of really good people out there, and if that news director knows that you're really intent on getting into the business, I think they'll at least spend a few minutes with you and talk to you about what you can do. Whether it's, maybe it's on news director, you know, I don't know what I'm looking at here, whether I'm looking at people that want to do behind the scenes, whether I want to be on the air, want to be on radio, you know, there's so much out there. And I think there's going to be, because there's, like that guy said, you know, I don't think you have to sell shoes. I haven't sold a shoe yet. So I think the business is still pretty good, and it's a lot of fun to be part of. Yeah.
Two questions for you. One, you could explain what a typical day is like for you. And two, forgive my ignorance, I'm not sure. Were you around when I think it was CPO had the hostage situation?
Yeah.
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, we had a guy that took, and I could tell you, it was October 15th of 1980, 81, something like that. It was fairly early on. The reason I remember it was the day that college teams were allowed to start practicing, what we call like Midnight Madness now or something like that. Well, UC was doing it for the very first time. Ed Badger was the coach, and I was up there with a photographer covering them, and they didn't make a big deal of it. They just practiced at midnight and let the media come in. So my photographer, Mike Williams, and I covered it, and we drove back to the station in the news van, and then I didn't see anybody else's. It must have been 1 a.m. or something like that, and I said to him, I says, well, I'm going to just head home. And he says, well, I got to take the gear inside. He took the gear inside, and he became a hostage. So, and him, and there were, I think, 5 or 6. And there was a guy who had killed his girlfriend somewhere else, and then he had decided he wanted to do a certain kind of say something on the air or something like that, or make some sort of point. So what he did is, when a couple of a reporter and a photographer were coming back from their work they were doing, he kind of accosted them in the parking lot at gunpoint, took them inside, held them at gunpoint, didn't harm anyone, and he told them he wanted to be on the air. Well, they said, somebody smartly said, we don't have any engineers here that can make that happen right now. It was past midnight. But they said, we'll tape an interview with you. And if you probably Google Elaine Green, she was the reporter, and she won a Peabody Award for doing the interview, and his name was James Hoskins. And he eventually then later took his own life in the newsroom. He let them all out, and then he went over by an editing bay, and he knew the cops' place was surrounded from all night long and stuff like that. And then he eventually shot himself. And I'm sure if you Google that, you'd find that was a case.
Did this make national?
Yeah, it was national. It was what I remember it was payday. And in those days you didn't have direct deposit. So you had to get into the station in order to get your paycheck. And we weren't allowed in the station. And that was good. And that was certain things mean something to you at some point. And then they let us all in, and and I'm guessing it was around 81, 80, something like that. TC, what was your first thing?
Oh, what's your typical day like?
This is an early day. I usually go in around 2:30, and on a day like today, I'm by myself in sports. It's a one-man sports department, but I have the help of news and that stuff if I need some shooting done, that sort of thing. So first thing I do is I go in and I start. I've been looking at Twitter all day, so I kind of have an idea of what's going on, and I've kind of outlined what I'd like them to shoot, or if I have a sports photographer in with him, he's shooting. And I'm looking for videotape. The important thing to me is TV is have the pictures. I mean, if you don't have pictures, you're radio, and radio's great, but there's a difference. And so I'm looking for highlights. I'm looking for something interesting that happened overnight. I'm looking for an interesting comment by somebody. You're looking to say what you could use for the Olympics. The Olympics have all kind of rules. You could use like 10 seconds the next day, and you have to wait 24 hours after the event, something like that. NBC puts all kinds of restrictions on it. So, and then by 4 o'clock, 4:30, I'm writing. And a lot of what we do is by ourselves now. You write. I mean, I've always written by myself, but I do all my own editing of video. You make your own graphics. The graphics you see behind us and that stuff, we do those all by internet now. We used to have somebody that built the graphics and put those behind you and made them real pretty and stuff like that. Now you pretty much do them on your own. So then hopefully by the time 6 o'clock comes around, you're ready to go on the air. And sometimes I do things at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock. And then when you're done with that, you start all over again for the 11 o'clock. And I'm usually there till about 11:45 at night. But it's a constant thing, just because, and all I get 2.5 minutes at 6 o'clock, 2.5 minutes at 11 o'clock. So you're trying to get as much into that 2.5 minute hole as you could possibly do. And my feeling is you got to be local. I mean, if you want national sports, you're going to go to ESPN. You're going to look at your Twitter. You're going to see whatever you want to see. But you have to be local here, whether it's high school, college, Bengals, Reds. Do the things that nobody else is going to care about except Cincinnati. So, anybody else? It's been a great class, I'll tell you that. I do a lot of career days, and be honest with you, by the time I leave a career day, it's like, because they're like, usually the first question is, hey, how much do you make?
See, you put in an 8-hour day for 5 minutes on air.
That's it.
Wow.
Yeah.
5.5 to 6 minutes on air.
Well, that's pretty much it, although it's, if you put it that way, TC, that's interesting.
I mean, there's obviously a lot of preparation.
Yeah, and I probably write a lot more than most. See, most of the news people, they don't write, when they're reading what they're reading on the air, and you might see them because they stumble every now and then. It's probably because they're reading something that they're not familiar with. Somebody else, a producer, wrote that. If I stumble, it's because I wrote it. And that happens too, but to me, it's a lot easier because we all talk a different way. We all say things a different way. And it's a lot easier if you're speaking in the way that's familiar with you. And I'll write and rewrite things 2-3 times if I'm not familiar with something, or try to say it a different way. You know, you only have that one chance to communicate with somebody. It's here and it's gone. And if you don't get that point across, you've lost it. So it's to me, it's real important to just don't try to be flowery. Don't try to act like you have to use big words. You know, just you want to communicate. That's what this is all about. Yeah.
If you do have a producer who's writing stuff for you and you don't feel like it's comfortable for you, as those newscasters, can they change what they write? Or
They
is
do.
that just
And
your
well, if
job
they're
to
if
say,
they're
like,
smart, they are. Exactly what you're saying. And any anchor person that doesn't look over what's being and usually what we call them is their lead-ins, or their things. They're introducing a reporter, or they're introducing a package. If they're not reading over that, they're asking for trouble. And especially if they have time to do it. Sometimes we've been shorthanded where, believe me, the first time they read that is the first time they've seen that story. So if that's not written clearly for them, and I'm sure you've seen this, that you could just see, what the heck is he talking about?
They don't even know.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I know the one time I came in with Ashley, I saw you do a take that was gonna run in the morning.
Right.
Like, you hit it like all in one take.
Right.
Is that something that you do like frequently and have the whole time, or is that something that just came with experience, not having to like redo it and rerun it?
Well, you really make mad the people at night who want to go home if you have to do 2 or 3 takes. So you do kind of learn that. I think you probably just with experience, probably the first couple times you do it, I mean, probably the first many times you do it, you're a little bit, the nerves are still with you, and you're a little bit tentative in what you do. But after a while, just. Plus, when I tape one of those things, I've already done it at 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
So I've already done a nice run through, and if there was any rough spot there, I should be able to get by it the second time through. So, should work out. Everybody else? Well, so and I recognize the face. You've been through with Ashley, so I hope that some of you, that if you have a chance, come by and see us. If you know somebody who's working there, come by and visit. Unfortunately, we don't do internships any longer. That used to be one of the great ways that we used to be able to do. Now Scripps has some paid internships, but I used to employ 4 or 5 young people all summer, and they did things, and most of them eventually, what?
I'll do it for free.
Yeah, well, see, that was the problem. Some people wanted to get paid. And it wasn't at our place, but there were some national things here some years ago where interns sued companies because they said they were doing the job as an intern, as an unpaid intern, that full-time employees should have been doing, so they should have been paid. So all of a sudden, a lot of media companies got scared of this, and so they decided, okay, the number one thing, we're cutting out unpaid interns. We could have paid interns, but what do you think a company's going to do if they have to start paying some other people? They really, they just say no thanks. And unfortunately, it is the way that so many people have started in our business. And I thought it was always good because in one summer you could find out whether you like this or not. And there were people that either loved it or hated it. Yeah.
Do they still do the high school internship for Scripps?
They do that, but I don't see any of those. I think they're up in sales. They might be in news, but they haven't offered any of those to sports. But they do have did you do one?
I did.
Okay, and how long did that last?
It was the whole summer.
A summer, every day, or?
They actually sent me to the Herald. Like, they grouped us up. It was 2
Oh, okay.
people at WCPO, 1 person at Scripps, and then 3 people were at the Cincinnati Herald.
I eventually send people to 5 and 12 and 19. They
we
still do
went there too.
internships. And the other thing we cut out is people that run cameras. We have robotic cameras in our studio. We have a teleprompter operator, and that's about it. That was the other way a lot of people that was their entry point into broadcasting. They'd run a camera, there'd be a floor director, they'd run a teleprompter. And now Ashley, who worked here, or went to school here, she works teleprompter, so there is a position there. But it used to be at least 3 people on a nightly basis. And again, so many of those people became other things. They decided maybe become a videographer, or work to become a producer, assignment editor, that sort of thing. But at least, because that allowed them to get them noticed. But to me, those are really unfortunate parts about our business, because it's really cut that starting point out.
So you mentioned teleprompter, and you always see the anchors shuffling papers or stacking their papers. What's written on the papers anymore? Do they have a
Not much, and you know,
script?
I'm the only one I think at our place that has paper now. The other ones use a tablet.
Oh, okay.
And, but they're always doing this stuff like, that damn thing won't move, or, you know. It depends on how good your Wi-Fi is and stuff like that, and how that sort of works, so. But I almost entirely depend on the prompter, except if there's something like last night, the Reds game ended like at 11:22, 30 seconds before I went on. We're not allowed to use any highlights until the game ends. It's a violation of the rights rules and that stuff of using before that. So I had to pretty much ad-lib the highlights at the top, because we were just throwing them up there, and the Reds, what had done is they'd given up 5 runs in the last inning to lose. So what I had written earlier was they were going to win 4-0, and then, you know, within a matter of minutes they lost 5-4. So you have to all of a sudden reverse course rule and try to make it look like you knew all the whole way. This is gonna.
Kinda can, it's the Reds.
Anybody else?
Any final questions for
Man,
Mr. Popovich here?
you guys have been great, and I'll tell you what, the questions were good and that stuff, and I just want to wish you all the best of luck. 'Cause this is,
Before we dismiss, quick announcement. This Saturday,